I told my mother-in-law that if she keeps rearranging my kitchen, she can get a hotel room, and now my husband's saying I need to apologize for disrespecting his mother. Hey everyone, welcome to Story Nest. Hitting that subscribe button really helps us out and makes sure you never miss a story. I'm married to a wonderful man, Mark, who also happens to be my best friend's brother. We've been together for several years now, and despite our height differences, me standing at an imposing 6 feet 6 inches and him at 5 feet 7 inches, we've managed to make things work. When we first moved in together, we quickly realized that our different statures would affect our daily lives in ways we hadn't expected. For example, the kitchen was an early point of contention. I could reach everything on the top shelves with ease, but for Mark, it was a struggle to get to even the most basic things. It was never a problem for me, but crouching down constantly to get what I needed was hard on my back, so we made adjustments. At first, we figured that using a step stool would be the simplest solution. It worked perfectly for him. Rather than asking me to constantly reach things for him, he could do it himself, and I could avoid the strain of crouching down all the time. It was a minor adjustment, but it made a big difference. We settled into our new rhythm, and I thought it was pretty comfortable for both of us until my mother-in-law came to stay. 2 weeks ago, Mark's mom, Linda, had to move in with us. Her roof needed some major repairs, and while my best friend didn't have the space, we had a spare room. It seemed like the only logical solution. At first, I was more than happy to have her, but things started to shift almost immediately. Linda didn't waste any time making her presence felt in the kitchen. It started with little things, shuffling things around on the shelves, moving the taller items to lower spots. At first, I didn't think much of it. She's older, after all. Maybe she didn't want to use the step stool. But as the days went on, her adjustments became more frequent, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. She wasn't even trying to make the space more functional for herself. She just didn't want to bother with the stool. She'd grumble about how ridiculous it was that everything in my kitchen was so high up and how it wasn't guest-friendly. I could feel my patience wearing thin, especially when she started rearranging things again after my husband, Mark, had already told her to stop. Mark was stuck in the middle, trying to keep the peace while also looking out for me. He'd gently ask his mom to leave things as they were. My comfort was important, after all. But Linda would back off for a day or so, and then, as if nothing had happened, she'd move everything around again. It didn't matter how many times we had this conversation, she couldn't seem to let it go. One morning, I went into the kitchen to make a cup of coffee, and I couldn't find my favorite mug. I searched for a good 5 minutes, irritation building with each passing second. When I finally found it, it was buried deep in a lower cabinet that required me to kneel down to get it. My back, which had been aching for days, screamed in protest. I snapped, and the frustration that had been quietly bubbling inside me finally erupted. Seriously, Linda, if you can't stop moving things around, maybe you should get a hotel room, I said, my voice sharp and biting. I didn't care about being polite anymore. The anger in my chest had been building for days, and it felt good to finally say something out loud. Linda's reaction was instant. She froze, her eyes widening in shock. Her face contorted into a mixture of confusion and hurt, as though she couldn't quite understand what had just happened. For a moment, the room hung in a heavy silence, punctuated only by the quiet hum of the coffee machine. The air felt thick, suffocating, and I could tell Mark was uncomfortable immediately. He didn't like confrontation, especially when it came to his mom, but this time, I wasn't backing down. Heartless, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly as if she couldn't believe I'd just said it. I'm just trying to make things more manageable for all of us. I'm only here because I need to be. Your husband's my son, and this is his home. It's only a small change, a little reorganization. She gestured vaguely toward the cabinets, as if rearranging my kitchen was the simplest, most harmless thing in the world. I could feel my chest tighten with anger again. It's not about a little reorganization, Linda. It's about respecting my space and my comfort. If it's so inconvenient for you to use the stool, you could always stay somewhere else. It's your choice. I knew my words were harsh, but I was tired. Tired of the constant rearranging, tired of my back hurting, and, honestly, tired of feeling like my own home wasn't truly mine anymore. Her eyes welled up with tears, and for a split second, I almost felt guilty. But the guilt was fleeting. She wasn't crying because she was concerned for me. She was crying because I'd called her out on her behavior. "I'm just trying to help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do I have to suffer just because you're tall? It's ridiculous to make everyone else adjust to you. And now you're telling me to leave? Over this?" The words stung, and I could see Mark growing visibly uncomfortable. He shifted from foot to foot, his gaze flickering between his mom and me, unsure of how to fix the situation. I could feel his anxiety rising, and as much as I wanted to stand firm, I hated seeing him like this. He loved his mom, and I knew he didn't want to be caught in the middle of our disagreement, but I couldn't back down this time. Mark stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Mom, it's not just my home, it's hers too. I don't want to see either of you upset, but I can't let this go on. If you can't respect her boundaries, then maybe it's time for you to find somewhere else to stay for a while." Linda's face twisted in disbelief. "Are you really going to let her push me out over something so trivial?" she demanded, her voice rising. "She's being unreasonable." "I'm your mother." Mark stood his ground, his voice calm but unwavering. "You're my mom and I love you, but she's my wife. I can't just ignore how she feels. This isn't about being unreasonable. This is about respect." I could hear Linda retreating into the guest room, her sobs muffled but still audible in the silence that followed. Mark didn't look at me. He just stood there, clearly torn. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw, and I knew he was trying not to show how badly this was affecting him. But I could feel the shift. Things were different now. The silence after Linda retreated to the guest room felt almost unbearable. The tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating, and Mark's discomfort was palpable. I could see him wrestling with his emotions, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to process everything that had just unfolded. I could tell he wanted to comfort his mom, but at the same time, he didn't want to back down from what he knew was right. He finally exhaled, his voice quiet but strained. "I don't want to make you feel bad, but I also can't keep letting this go on. I know it's difficult, but it's not just her home, it's ours too. I need you to understand that." I nodded, though it didn't really seem to reassure him. "I know, Mark," I said softly, but the words felt hollow. Deep down, I was already questioning myself, second-guessing my reaction. Had I gone too far? Should I have just dealt with the situation more gently? My frustration had gotten the better of me, but did that make me heartless? I didn't feel heartless in the moment. I felt exasperated, exhausted by the constant shifting and moving of things in a place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. But seeing Mark's anxious expression made me wonder if I could have handled it differently. "I hate seeing you like this," Mark said, his voice filled with guilt. "I don't want you to feel bad about standing up for yourself, but I also don't want you to feel like you're the bad guy here. I'm just trying to keep the peace." I sighed, the weight of everything settling heavily on my chest. "I don't want you to feel like you have to choose between me and your mom. I don't want to make you feel torn, but I also can't just keep pretending everything is okay when it's not." Mark took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. I know. It's just, I don't know how to fix this. I don't want to lose either of you, and I don't know how to make it right." I felt a pang of sympathy for him, knowing how hard this was. He was stuck in the middle, trying to manage two people he loved who were clearly at odds with each other. I could see his conflict, and it made my heart ache. But I also knew I couldn't apologize for wanting to be treated with respect in my own home. It wasn't long before we both found ourselves standing at the doorway to the guest room, hesitating. I knew Mark wanted to comfort his mom, to somehow mend the rift that had formed between her and me, but I wasn't sure how much more of this I could handle. The thought of her continuing to move things around in my kitchen made my stomach churn, but more than that, the guilt of seeing Mark struggle between us gnawed at me. I felt the weight of the moment, the uncertainty, the pain, and the frustration flooding over me. I had stood my ground, but at what cost? Would I regret this? Was it really worth it? I didn't want to be the one causing all the pain, but I also knew that if I kept letting my own comfort and boundaries slide, I would only get more resentful. I could still hear Linda sobbing quietly from the other side of the door, and I knew Mark was struggling with how to handle this. I wanted to offer him comfort, but I didn't know what words could ease the tension. There were no simple solutions, and I hated that. But in the end, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep silencing my own feelings. My home, my space, my comfort, it mattered just as much as anyone else's. I had to stand firm, even if it meant upsetting people I cared about. Mark and I would work through this, I was sure of it. But it wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead would require patience from both of us. I just hoped that, in time, Linda would understand why I had to say what I did, even if she wasn't ready to hear it yet.